I'm Alex Parker, 32 years old, and my own parents brought a moving truck to throw me out of my house so my golden child brother and his pregnant wife could move in. Before I tell you how I ended up with a legal restraining order against my entire family and a promotion to vice president, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. It all happened on a Saturday. One of those perfect, late spring Saturdays in Boston where the air is warm but not heavy, and the sky is a brilliant, cloudless blue. I was in my backyard, finally staining the deck I'd built with my own two hands, feeling a sense of peace I'd worked my entire adult life to achieve. This house, this 3-bedroom colonial in a quiet suburb, wasn't just wood and nails to me. It was a monument to every scholarship I had to win, every double shift I had to work, every sacrifice I had to make because I was not the chosen son. The first sign of trouble was a large delivery truck rumbling down my street. It was unusual for a Saturday. Pulled into my driveway, and 2 guys in uniforms hopped out. They had a clipboard. "Delivery for Parker?" One of them asked. "That's me?" I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. "All right, we've got a crib, changing table, and a full nursery set here." I stared at him, my mind blank. "I think you have the wrong address. I didn't order any baby furniture." The man checked his clipboard again, then showed it to me. The name was Emma Parker, my brother Nathan's wife, and the delivery address was mine. My blood ran cold. Before I could even process the audacity, a second truck appeared. This one was a U-Haul, the kind you rent for moving. It parked right behind the delivery truck, and my parents, Karen and Thomas Parker, got out of the cab, smiling. Not just smiling, but beaming, like they were the bearers of great news. "Alex, honey, perfect timing," my mother called out, walking towards me. "We came to help you with the move." I looked from the baby furniture to the U-Haul, then to the triumphant look on my parents' faces. My stomach twisted into a knot. "What move?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "What is all this?" My father clapped his hands together. "Well, son, with the baby coming, Nathan and Emma need a proper home. We found a great little studio for you downtown. Already paid the first 3 months' rent. It's all taken care of." They weren't asking. They were telling. They had come to evict me from my own home. My home. The one I had the mortgage for, the one with my name on the deed. Every ounce of suppressed anger, every childhood slight, every moment of being second best coalesced into a single, chilling point of clarity. I looked at their smiling, expectant faces, and I knew reasoning wouldn't work. It never had. I took a deep breath, unlocked my phone, and dialed 3 numbers. 911. To understand why I called the police on my own parents, you have to understand the foundation our family was built on. It wasn't a foundation of love, not for everyone equally. It was built on the pedestal they had constructed for my younger brother, Nathan. And I was just the guy who was supposed to help keep him on it, the silent, sturdy support beam for his gilded stage. Started so early that for years I thought it was normal. I thought every older brother existed in a similar state of benign neglect. The first time the unfairness truly crystallized, the first time it wasn't just a feeling but a cold, hard fact, was my 10th birthday. I wanted a new bike more than anything in the world. A gleaming red Huffy with chrome fenders I'd seen in the window of the local hardware store. I'd done extra chores for months, hoarding my allowance in a shoebox under my bed. On my birthday, my parents presented me with a bike. It was red, but the paint was a little dull, and I could see a few nicks and scratches peeking through. It was a used bike they'd bought from a neighbor and repainted in the garage. "It's practically new, Alex," my dad had said, ruffling my hair with that dismissive affection he had perfected. "Waste not, want not. Builds character." I tried to be grateful, I really did. But 2 months later, on Nathan's 10th birthday, they rolled out a brand new, top-of-the-line Schwinn. It had 10 gears, handlebar tassels, and that intoxicating new bike smell. "Only the best for my boy," my father had declared, his voice booming with a pride I'd never heard directed at me. I just stood there, next to my repainted Huffy, and felt something inside me crack. A small, hairline fracture in the innocence of childhood. That fracture widened into a chasm over the years. It was in the small things and the big things. Report card day was always a trial. I'd bring home straight A's, and my mother would glance at the paper and say, "That's nice, honey," before putting it on the fridge under a magnet. When Nathan, who was 2 years behind me, brought home a report card of C's and a single B-, my father would sit him down, pore over the paper and say, "Well, look at this B in history. You've got a real knack for it, son. We should get you some books to encourage that." My A in calculus was just expected. His B- in history was a sign of burgeoning genius. Christmas was a masterclass in their selective generosity. One year I asked for a chemistry set. I was fascinated by science. I got a sweater. It was a nice sweater, but it wasn't a chemistry set. Nathan, who had idly mentioned he thought video games were kinda cool, got a brand new Nintendo console with 3 games. When I looked disappointed, my mother pulled me aside. "Alex, you're the serious one. We knew you'd understand. Nathan needs more encouragement to find his passions." My passion, apparently, didn't require encouragement. It was just supposed to exist to be self-sufficient. When it came time for college, the unspoken rules became ironclad policy. I knew I was on my own. I worked my tail off in high school not just for grades, but for scholarships. I was on the debate team, the mathletes, anything to pad my applications. I got a partial academic scholarship to Boston University, a great school, but partial was the operative word. To make up the difference, I worked. I was a busboy at a greasy diner downtown, coming home late smelling of fried onions and stale coffee, my shoes slick with grease. I was a library assistant, shelving books while my friends were at parties, my fingers dusty and my mind numb from the sheer monotony. I did it without complaint because that was the deal. The deal didn't apply to Nathan. He wasn't the strongest student. But that didn't matter. My parents proudly announced they were sending him to a private liberal arts college in Vermont, a place with a price tag that made my eyes water. "It's a better fit for his creative spirit," my mother would explain to relatives. "They'll nurture him there." I remember one Thanksgiving, I was home from BU for the holiday, exhausted from midterms and my part-time job. My aunt asked how I was managing. Before I could answer, my mother jumped in with a bright, brittle smile. "Oh, Alex is so resilient. He's always been our responsible one. He handles it all." Then, in the next breath, she turned to my other aunt and her voice softened, filled with pride. "We're so proud of Nathan. His professors say he has a real gift for finding himself. It's worth every penny to give him that space to grow." I sat there, my hands smelling faintly of the dish soap from the diner, and listened to them talk about the value of Nathan's growth, while my own was measured in calluses and sleep deprivation. It was then I realized they didn't see it as unfair. In their minds, they were just allocating resources according to need. And Nathan, in his perpetual state of finding himself, was always the needier one. My best friend, Sarah, was my lifeline through it all. We met in a brutal macroeconomics class at BU, bonding over our shared misery. She saw the whole picture with a clarity I couldn't always afford. She came from a big, boisterous family where everything was a chaotic but fair fight. She couldn't comprehend the quiet, systemic injustice of mine. One night, we were having a beer at a cheap pub near campus, and I was venting about having to pick up an extra shift, meaning I'd miss a concert we were supposed to go to. "It's for Nathan's car insurance," I explained, shaking my head in weary resignation. "He got into a little fender bender, and my parents are in a tight spot, so they asked if I could help out. It's only a couple $100. Sarah put her beer down with a thud and looked me dead in the eye. Her face was furious on my behalf. "Alex, that's not just favoritism. That's not just them being in a tight spot. That's abuse. It's financial and emotional abuse. They are using you as a resource to fund your brother's life. You are not their emergency fund. You are their son." Hearing her say it out loud, so plainly, was like a physical blow. I'd always just called it the way things are. But she was right. It was a system, and I was its unwilling, unpaid employee. That conversation was a turning point. I started saying no. It was hard. Caused fights. My mother would cry. My father would lecture me on loyalty. But I held firm. I focused on my own life, my own career. I graduated with honors, landed a junior marketing role at a tech firm, and started climbing. I worked relentlessly. While Nathan was finding himself through a series of failed startups funded by our parents, I was finding myself in boardrooms and successful campaigns. At 29, I did the one thing I'd dreamed of since I was a boy looking at that used bike. I bought my own damn house. I didn't ask for a dime. I'd saved every bonus, every commission. The down payment was the culmination of a decade of grinding. It was a beautiful 3-bedroom colonial with a big backyard, in a neighborhood I never thought I'd be able to afford. The day I closed, I was bursting with pride. I invited my parents over for dinner that weekend. I expected, for the first time, a glimmer of pride, of acknowledgement. I walked them through the house, pointing out the hardwood floors, the fireplace, the big kitchen. They were quiet, too quiet. Finally, as we stood in the spacious living room, my mother turned to me, a tight little smile on her face. "Well," she said, looking around, "it's a lot of space for just one person, isn't it? A bit empty." My father nodded in agreement. "A family home, really? You must get lonely here all by yourself." There it was. Even my greatest achievement was framed as a lack, a failure. It wasn't a home. It was just an empty space that highlighted my single status. It wasn't a symbol of my success. It was a reminder that I hadn't followed the correct path, the one Nathan was on. 2 months before the trucks arrived, Nathan and his wife, Emma, announced she was pregnant. I was happy for them, genuinely. I thought maybe this will be a new chapter. Maybe a grandchild will even things out. I was so naive. The announcement was at a Sunday dinner. After the initial excitement, I saw Emma looking around my living room, a strange, calculating look in her eyes. It was a look I recognized from my own job, the look of someone assessing an asset. A few days later, Nathan lost his job. It was another one of his misunderstood genius situations. And then the calls started. It began with my mother. "Alex, honey, I was just thinking, with Nathan out of work and the baby coming, they're so stressed about money. And you have all this space." I shut it down immediately. "Mom, my house is not an option. They can find an apartment." But it was like they couldn't hear me. The calls became a campaign. My father would call and talk about a father's duty to his family. My mother would call and cry about how worried she was for her future grandchild. They framed it as my duty, as the one who had it easy, because I didn't have a family to support. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. The final conversation before that Saturday was with Nathan himself. He sounded pathetic. "Alex, man, Emma's really freaking out. We just need a little help to get on our feet. A year, maybe 2. It's a big house. You wouldn't even know we were there." "The answer is no, Nathan," I said, my voice hard. "This is my home. You need to solve your own problems." He sighed, a long-suffering sound he'd perfected over a lifetime. "I just don't get why you have to be so selfish, Alex." That was the last I heard from them until that Saturday. Until the baby furniture arrived, a Trojan horse signaling the invasion to come. They hadn't been asking for my help. They had been planning my removal. And as I stood there in my yard, the cops on the line, I realized this wasn't just about a house. It was about my entire life. It was the culmination of 30 years of being told my wants, my needs, my accomplishments, and my very existence were secondary. And I was done being secondary. The arrival of the police was surreal. 2 officers, a man and a woman, pulled up, their expressions carefully neutral as they took in the bizarre tableau on my front lawn. 2 large trucks, a pile of unassembled baby furniture, my parents standing there looking indignant, and me, phone still in hand, standing by my newly built deck. It was a domestic dispute in the making, and they'd seen it 1,000 times. "What seems to be the problem here?" the male officer asked, his eyes scanning the scene with a practiced calm. My mother, a seasoned performer, immediately burst into tears, the kind she could summon on command. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," she sobbed, clutching my father's arm. We're just trying to help our son. He's not well. He's all alone in this big house. And his brother, his poor brother Nathan, is expecting a baby and has nowhere to live. We were just trying to move Alex into a more manageable apartment, something cozy for him. The officer looked at me, one eyebrow slightly raised. Is that true, sir? Are these people helping you move? I took a breath, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. The absurdity of it all was clarifying. No, officer. This is my house. My name is on the deed. I have the mortgage statements, the tax bills, everything right inside. These people, I said, gesturing to my own parents, are my family. They have shown up unannounced with a moving truck and expect me to vacate my property so my brother can live here. The baby furniture they've ordered was sent to my address without my knowledge or consent. I have asked them to leave, and they have refused. The female officer turned to my father. Sir, is this your son's property? My father puffed out his chest, falling back on a lifetime of assumed authority. We're his parents. We're just trying to do what's best for the family. He's clearly overwhelmed and not thinking straight. That's not what I asked, she said, her voice firm but patient, the voice of someone used to cutting through nonsense. Do you own this house? Is your name on the deed? Well, no, but then you're trespassing, she said flatly. The owner of this property has asked you to leave. That means you, your wife, and these trucks need to be off this property immediately. If you don't comply, we can escort you. The color drained from my parents' faces. The idea that their parental authority meant nothing in the eyes of the law was a shock to their system. They sputtered, they argued, they tried again to paint me as mentally unstable, but the officers were unmoved. The law was the law. Defeated, they got back in the U-Haul, my father slamming the door with a petulant rage. The delivery guys, looking relieved to be out of the drama, quickly loaded the nursery set back onto their truck. As my parents drove away, my mother stared at me from the passenger window, her face a mask of betrayal and fury. It was a look that said, "You will pay for this." I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. That was just the opening salvo. The real war was about to begin, and it was going to be fought online in the court of public opinion, where my family held all the power. 2 days later, my phone started blowing up. It was a text from my cousin Mark. "What the hell did you do to Aunt Karen? She's heartbroken." Then another from an aunt. "Alex, your mother called me in tears. We need to talk." I went on Facebook, and there it was. A post from Emma, my sister-in-law. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, a public relations hit job disguised as a cry for help. There was a picture of her, looking teary-eyed and vulnerable, with Nathan's arm wrapped protectively around her. The caption read, "It's with the heaviest of hearts that we have to share some difficult news. As you know, we're so excited to welcome our little miracle, but we've hit a rough patch financially. We had a wonderful opportunity to move into a safe, stable family home to raise our baby, but sadly, my brother-in-law Alex has decided he needs the 3-bedroom house all to himself. In a shocking turn of events, he called the police on his own elderly parents who were just trying to help everyone find a solution. We are heartbroken and don't know where we'll go. Please keep us in your prayers." It was brilliant. It was vicious. And it worked. The comments were a tidal wave of sympathy for them and condemnation for me. "I can't believe your brother would be so selfish. Praying for you, sweetie. Some people have no heart." My extended family, who only ever got my parents' carefully curated version of reality, took the bait hook, line, and sinker. I was instantly cast as the villain. The cold, heartless monster who would see his pregnant sister-in-law and his own parents out on the street. The pressure campaign that followed was relentless and multi-pronged. It wasn't just calls anymore. It was a coordinated attack. My cousin Mark, who had always hero-worshipped my father, took it upon himself to be the family enforcer. He left nasty comments on my social media. He sent me long, sanctimonious emails about my lack of family values, quoting Bible verses about honoring thy father and mother. My parents, meanwhile, played the victim card perfectly. They wouldn't call me directly. That would be too confrontational. Instead, they'd call my aunts and uncles, crying about how their own son had turned on them, how they feared for my soul. The message was always relayed back to me through a concerned relative. "Alex, your mother is a wreck," my Aunt Carol told me over the phone, her voice thick with disapproval. "She says you've changed, that this marketing job has made you hard and materialistic. She's just worried about you, all alone in that big, empty house." Through all this, I started to notice a pattern, a chilling consistency in the language. The phrase stable family home kept coming up. The idea of me being isolated and unwell. It was strategic. And the strategist I was beginning to suspect was Emma. She had a degree in communications, I remembered. She'd always been clever with words, able to twist situations to her advantage in a way that left you feeling confused and vaguely guilty. I did a little digging on her public social media profiles. Her past posts were full of carefully crafted narratives about her journey, her struggles, her triumphs. She was an expert at personal branding. And now she was branding me as the villain in her story. The suspicion solidified during a mandatory family dinner at my aunt's house a few weeks later. I only went because my Aunt Susan, my mother's younger sister, had called and gently insisted. She was usually the quiet, observant one, and I didn't want to alienate her. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken judgment. Emma was there, holding court, looking radiant in her pregnancy, accepting sympathies from everyone. I was sitting in the living room, trying to be invisible, when I overheard her talking to Nathan in the hallway. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught a few key phrases. "It's all about positioning, Nate," she was saying in a low, urgent voice. "We have to control the narrative. He's the isolated, successful but unhappy bachelor with the empty house. We're the struggling, growing family." It's a simple, emotional appeal. Sympathy is our greatest weapon. We just have to keep the pressure on from all sides. He'll break. He always does. Control the narrative. Emotional appeal. Positioning. He'll break. He always does. It was the language of my profession. The language of marketing. She wasn't just a grieving wife. She was a campaign manager, and her product was my house. The cold fury that had been simmering inside me for weeks turned into ice. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a family squabble. This was a hostile takeover attempt, planned and executed with cold, calculating precision. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. Every head turned towards me. I walked over to the front door without a word. My Aunt Carol called after me, "Alex, where are you going?" I turned, looked directly at Emma, whose face had gone rigid, and said, "I'm going home." Driving back to my house, the pieces clicked into place. The furniture delivery wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate first move, designed to put me on the defensive. The U-Haul wasn't a spontaneous act of help. It was the follow-through. The social media post wasn't a cry for help. It was psychological warfare. They thought I would break. They had underestimated me my entire life, and they were doing it again. They saw me as the quiet, accommodating son who would eventually cave to guilt and pressure. They didn't see the man I had become, a marketing executive who understood strategy better than they ever could. They had started a war, but they had no idea who they were fighting. I got home, walked into my office, and sat down at my desk. The anger was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. I pulled out my phone and made one last call. "Dad?" I said when he answered, my voice devoid of all emotion. "I'm going to say this one last time. This campaign against me stops now. The calls, the social media, the lies to the family, all of it. It stops. If you and Mom and Nathan and Emma continue, I will not be responsible for my next actions. I will protect my home, my career, and my sanity by any means necessary. This is not a request. It is a statement of fact. Do you understand me?" There was a pause, and then my father's familiar, dismissive chuckle. The sound that had belittled my achievements my entire life. "Alex, don't be so dramatic. We're your family. We're just trying to talk some sense into you." He hung up, and in that moment, I knew what I had to do. They had declared war. It was time for me to write a battle plan. The phone call with my father was the final confirmation. They weren't going to stop. They genuinely believed they were in the right, that their desires trumped my rights. My mother's tears, my father's authority, Nathan's weakness, and Emma's strategy. It was a four-headed monster, and reasoning with it was impossible. So, I stopped trying to reason. I started planning. My first call the next morning was to a highly recommended law firm in downtown Boston. I didn't want a family counselor. I wanted a litigator. I sat in a sleek, modern office across from a woman named Ms. Albright, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer in her 50s with a reputation for being a shark. I laid out the entire story, from the used bike to the U-Haul to the coordinated social media campaign. I showed her the Facebook posts, the texts from my cousin, the whole ugly picture. She listened patiently, her face unreadable, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Parker," she said, her voice calm and measured, "what you're describing is a classic case of harassment and attempted coercion. The fact that it's your family makes it emotionally complicated, but legally it's quite straightforward. Your property is your property. Their actions, particularly the social media campaign, could be construed as defamation designed to unlawfully deprive you of it." Hearing a legal professional validate my reality was like a weight lifting off my chest. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the villain. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice filled with a new sense of purpose. "We build a case," she said, her eyes sharp. "We document everything. Every call, every text, every social media post. We need to establish a clear pattern of harassment. But I'm going to suggest we go one step further. These people are operating on a false narrative, that you are unsuccessful and unstable. We need to be prepared to dismantle that narrative, not just defend against it. We need to go on the offensive." Her words resonated with my marketing brain. We weren't just playing defense. We were preparing a counteroffensive. My next step felt extreme but necessary. Ms. Albright had recommended a licensed private investigator, a former police detective named Frank. Hiring a PI to investigate my own family felt like something out of a movie, but this was my life. I met him in a coffee shop. He was a quiet, unassuming man who looked more like a history teacher than a detective. "What do you need, Mr. Parker?" he asked, stirring his coffee. "I need to know who is pulling the strings," I said. "I suspect my sister-in-law, Emma, is the primary strategist. I need to know her history. I also need to know if they have any leverage over me I'm not aware of. Any weak points." I paused, then added, "And I have a gut feeling about a colleague of mine. His name is David Chun. He's been a little too interested in this whole situation. See if there's a connection to my brother, Nathan." It was a business decision. I was investing in asset protection. My home and my sanity were my most valuable assets. While Frank did his work, I focused on mine. I threw myself into a major project at my firm, a competitive pitch for a huge new client in the renewable energy sector. It was the biggest opportunity of my career, and it was a welcome distraction, a world where logic and results mattered more than manipulative family dynamics. A week later, Frank called me. "Got something for you," he said, his voice low. "Your sister-in-law, Emma, is clean in the legal sense, but she's got a pattern. Talked to some people from her old jobs. She's known for being a social climber, good at office politics, better at taking credit for other people's work. She left her last two jobs shortly after major projects she led fell apart. But the interesting part is your colleague, David Chin. He and your brother Nathan weren't just friends. They were fraternity brothers back in college. Phone records show a dozen calls between them in the last 2 weeks alone. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. David, he'd sat in my office, listening to me vent, patting me on the back, telling me to hang in there. And the whole time he was a spy. My family had a man on the inside. Now I had a choice. I could confront him 'cause a scene at work, or I could use it. I chose to use it. The next day, I walked over to David's desk by the coffee machine, putting on my best stressed executive act. "Man, what a week," I said, rubbing my temples. "This new client pitch is killing me. The good news is it looks like we're in the final running. The bad news is I have to fly out to the West Coast on Monday for the final presentation. I'll be gone the whole week. The house will be empty. Honestly, I'm a little nervous about leaving it vacant with everything that's going on. David's eyes had a flicker of something. Interest, excitement. He gave me his usual sympathetic look. Oh man, that's tough. Well, good luck with the pitch. You'll kill it. Don't worry about things here. I walked back to my desk, my heart pounding. I immediately called Frank. They're going to make a move next week, I said. They're going to think I'm 3,000 miles away. I spent the weekend with Ms. Albright and a security consultant. We installed new, high-end security cameras covering every angle of my property, all feeding directly to the cloud and my phone. We changed the locks to a keyless system that logged every entry attempt. I was no longer just a victim. I was setting a trap. I did not go to the West Coast. On Monday morning, instead of heading to Logan Airport, I checked into a hotel near my lawyer's office. I set up a mobile command center in the room. My work laptop, my personal phone streaming the live feed from my home security, and a direct line to Ms. Albright. The trap was set. The bait was out. Now I just had to wait for the rats to scurry out of the walls. I didn't have to wait long. Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from my front porch camera. I opened the live feed, my heart hammering against my ribs. There it was. A locksmith van parked in my driveway. My brother Nathan and my father were standing on my porch, looking impatient. Nathan was shifting his weight from foot to foot, while my father stood with his arms crossed, a look of grim satisfaction on his face. They were so confident, so arrogant. They thought I was on the other side of the country. They thought they had won. I watched them for a full 5 minutes, a cold, detached part of my brain recording every detail. The locksmith was hesitant, asking them questions. I saw my father hand him a piece of paper, probably some forged document claiming they had a right to be there. I zoomed in, saved the footage, and made 2 calls. The first was to 911, reporting a break-in in progress at my address, giving them a detailed description of the men and the van. The second was to Ms. Albright. They took the bait, I said, my voice steady. It's happening now. The police response was swift. 2 patrol cars arrived within minutes, lights flashing, sirens off until the last second. The footage was almost comical, a silent film of idiocy and panic. The look of sheer terror on Nathan's and my father's faces as they were caught red-handed, trying to illegally enter my home. They were separated, questioned, and ultimately detained. The locksmith, realizing he'd been duped and was now an accessory to a crime, packed up his tools and left faster than I'd ever seen anyone move. This was the leverage we needed. This was no longer a family misunderstanding. This was a criminal act, documented and witnessed. Ms. Albright moved swiftly. The next day, she sent a formal, legally binding letter to my parents, Nathan, and Emma. It didn't invite a conversation. It demanded their presence at her office on Friday afternoon for a mediation meeting to discuss recent events and avoid further legal escalation. It was phrased to sound like an offer, a chance for them to talk their way out of trouble. They, of course, agreed to come. Their arrogance was their greatest weakness. Friday came. I was in the conference room with Ms. Albright when they arrived. My parents, Karen and Thomas. My brother, Nathan, and his wife, Emma. They walked in with an air of wounded righteousness, like they were the ones who had been wronged. Emma was holding her pregnant belly, a deliberate, theatrical gesture. They sat opposite us at the long, polished mahogany table, a battlefield of dark wood and tension. "Thank you for coming," Ms. Albright began, her voice cool and professional. "My client, Alex, wanted to resolve this matter privately, as a family." My father scoffed, his face red with indignation. "A little late for that, isn't it? After he had us arrested?" His own father. "Your clients were detained during the commission of a crime, Mr. Parker." Ms. Albright corrected him without missing a beat. "But that's what we're here to discuss." She slid 4 thick, spiral-bound documents across the table. "Before we talk, I'd like you all to review this." They opened the folders. I watched their faces, a study in crumbling facades. The first page was a copy of the police report from the attempted break-in. Their expressions tightened. The next few pages were high-resolution photos printed from my security cameras, showing them clearly on my porch with the locksmith. Nathan went pale, his hand trembling slightly. "This is a violation of our privacy," my mother stammered, her voice shrill. "It's a recording of a crime being committed on my client's private property," Ms. Albright said calmly. "Perfectly legal. Please, keep reading." The next section was Frank's report. It detailed the social media campaign, the harassing calls, and the connection between David Chun and Nathan, including their phone records showing the call logs before and after I had confided in David. Emma's composure finally cracked. Her carefully constructed mask of a worried mother-to-be slipped, revealing the cold fury beneath. Her eyes darted nervously towards Nathan, a silent, venomous accusation. But the real bombshell was the last exhibit. "Exhibit D," Ms. Albright said, her voice dropping slightly. "This is a sworn affidavit from your sister, Karen. Susan." My mother looked up, her face a mask of disbelief. "Susan? What does she have to do with this?" "She wouldn't. It seems Susan was very troubled by a conversation she had with you and Emma a few weeks ago," Ms. Albright continued, her gaze unwavering. "So troubled, in fact, that she felt compelled to record it for her own protection. She has provided us with a copy." Ms. Albright pressed a button on a small digital recorder on the table. And then, my Aunt Susan's voice filled the silent room, hesitant at first. "I just don't know, Karen. This seems wrong." Then my mother's voice, impatient. "It's for the good of the family, Susan. Alex doesn't know what he wants." And then the voice of the strategist, Emma, clear and cold. "We have to frame him as unstable. We create the crisis, then we offer the solution. The house is the asset. We just have to make it socially impossible for him to say no. We use the family, we use his own guilt. He'll break. He always does." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by a small, choked sob from my mother. Emma looked like she was going to be sick. My father stared at the table, his face ashen. My brother just looked small, a puppet whose strings had been cut. They were broken, but I wasn't done. There was one more piece to my counteroffensive. "There's one final thing," Ms. Albright said, turning to a large monitor on the wall. "My client's employers have become aware of this campaign of harassment against him. His CEO, Mr. Henderson, was so concerned that he prepared a short statement for you." She clicked a mouse, and my CEO's face appeared on the screen. Mr. Henderson was an imposing, old-school executive, a man who commanded respect. He looked directly into the camera, his expression grim. "I don't normally get involved in my employees' personal lives," he began, his voice deep and authoritative. "However, when a coordinated campaign of harassment threatens the well-being and professional standing of one of my top executives, it becomes a corporate matter. Alex Parker is not just a valued employee. He is a cornerstone of our marketing division. In light of his recent extraordinary success in landing the largest client in this firm's history, a success achieved while under this immense personal pressure, I am announcing his promotion to Vice President of Marketing, effective immediately." He paused, letting the words sink in, a death knell to their narrative. "This firm has a zero-tolerance policy for harassment. Any further contact with Mr. Parker, his colleagues, or his place of work will be met with the full force of our corporate legal department. We protect our people." End of statement. The video ended. The room was a tomb. The narrative they had built for 30 years, of Alex the failure, Alex the second best, Alex the one who needed their help, had been systematically, legally, and professionally obliterated in the space of 20 minutes. They had come for a negotiation. They had walked into a checkmate. The silence that followed Mr. Henderson's video was the most profound silence I have ever experienced. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the wreckage of their lies, the collapse of their long-held delusions. The four of them just sat there, utterly defeated, stripped bare under the harsh, fluorescent lights of the conference room. The fight was gone, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding of what they had done and, more importantly, what they had lost. They hadn't just lost the fight for my house. They had lost all power, all authority, all moral high ground. Ms. Albright let the silence hang in the air for a full minute, a tactical move that allowed the full weight of their defeat to settle upon them. Then she spoke again, her voice crisp and final, the sound of a judge delivering a verdict. She slid another set of documents across the table. "This is a cease and desist agreement," she said. "It's not a request. You will sign it today, right now. It stipulates that you will have no further contact with my client. No calls, no texts, no emails, no social media posts, no unannounced visits to his home or office. You will not come within 500 feet of his property or his place of employment. You will not speak of him to third parties in a defamatory manner. Any violation of this legally binding agreement will result in an immediate filing for a formal restraining order, using all the evidence we have just reviewed, which will then become a matter of public record. Are we clear?" There was no argument, no protest. The fire in my father's eyes was extinguished, leaving only dull embers of shame. My mother's tears were no longer manipulative. They were the real, bitter tears of loss. One by one, with shaking hands, they signed. My father, the patriarch, couldn't even look at me. My mother signed with a choked sob. Nathan looked like a lost little boy, his eyes darting to Emma as if for instructions, but she was staring blankly at the wall, her own schemes having crumbled around her. She signed the document with a vicious, angry slash of the pen. They pushed the signed papers back across the table as if they were contaminated. "We're done here," Ms. Albright said, standing up, a clear dismissal. "The doorman will show you out." They shuffled out of the room like ghosts, a broken, defeated unit, not a single one of them looking me in the eye. As the door clicked shut behind them, I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for my entire life. It was over. The next Monday, when I walked into the office, the news of my promotion had already spread. People congratulated me, their handshakes firm, their smiles genuine. Later that day, I received a short, formal email from HR. "This is to inform you that David Chen's employment with this company has been terminated, effective immediately, due to a serious breach of our company's code of conduct and confidentiality policies." There was no fanfare, just a quiet, efficient closing of a painful chapter. Justice, it turned out, could be swift and silent. That evening, I did something I'd been putting off. I went to the hardware store and bought the best digital lock set they had, a heavy, solid piece of brushed nickel. I spent the next 2 hours installing it myself, removing the old lock that my father had a key to, the one Nathan had tried to have drilled out. Each turn of the screwdriver felt symbolic. I was dismantling the old system, the one that gave them access. I was taking away their key, literally and figuratively. As I tightened the final screw and programmed the new code, a code known only to me, it felt like more than just changing a lock. It was a ritual. I was securing my fortress. I was reclaiming my space, not just from my family, but from the ghost of the person I used to be. The boy who waited for approval, the young man who accepted unfairness as his lot in life. The days that followed were quiet, eerily so. The phone didn't ring with my mother's tearful manipulations. My email was free of my cousin's sanctimonious rants. My social media was just pictures of my friends and my hobbies. The silence was jarring at first. It was the silence of a limb that has been amputated. It ached with a phantom pain. For the first week, I'd flinch every time my phone buzzed, expecting another attack. I found myself rehearsing arguments in the shower that I no longer needed to have. I was grieving, I realized, not for the family I had, but for the one I had always wished for, the one that had never really existed. But day by day, the ache lessened. The silence stopped being an absence and started being a presence. It was the presence of peace. It was the peace of not having to justify my existence. The peace of not waiting for the other shoe to drop. The peace of knowing my home was my sanctuary, and no one could invade it. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was the sound of my own life, beginning on my own terms. The year that followed the showdown in the lawyer's office was a year of construction. Not just of my career or my house, but of my life itself, from the foundations up. The promotion to vice president was more than just a title and a pay raise. It was a validation that came from a world where merit, not birth order, was the currency. I threw myself into the role, leading my team, launching successful campaigns, and earning the respect of my colleagues, including Mr. Henderson. He never mentioned the video or my family again, but there was a new level of regard in his eyes when we spoke in the boardroom. He saw me not as a victim, but as a strategist who had handled a hostile situation with precision and strength. It was a kind of respect my own father had never shown me. With the silence from my family being absolute, my house began to transform. It was no longer just a property to be defended. It was a home to be enjoyed, a canvas for my own identity. I tore out the old, drab carpets my mother had criticized and had the original hardwood floors refinished to a warm, deep shine that felt solid under my feet. I painted the walls in bold, confident colors. A deep navy for my office, a warm gray for the living room, colors my mother would have called gloomy. The backyard, once just a patch of grass, became my project. I expanded the deck, built a stone fire pit, and with the help of countless YouTube tutorials, planted a garden. My hands, once calloused from diner work, were now calloused from building something beautiful for myself. It was during this time that Sarah, my ever-loyal friend, reintroduced me to an old college acquaintance of hers. His name was Daniel. He was an architect, a calm, thoughtful man with a quiet confidence and a smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. Our first date was just coffee, but we talked for 3 hours. I told him cautiously at first about my family. I didn't want to scare him off with my baggage, but I also knew I couldn't build something new on a foundation of secrets. He listened, his expression never changing from one of gentle focus. He didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. When I finished, he just nodded slowly. "That's a heavy burden to carry," he said. "It takes incredible strength to set boundaries like that, to choose yourself." He didn't pity me. He respected me. It was a new and intoxicating feeling. Daniel became a fixture in my life and in my home. He loved the house, not as an asset, but for its character, its good bones, as he called them. He'd sketch out ideas for the renovation, his passion for design infectious. He never pushed, never presumed. He understood that this space was mine, a symbol of my independence. His presence didn't fill an emptiness, as my parents had suggested. It complemented a fullness that was already there. About 10 months after the signing of the cease and desist, I got a call from my Aunt Susan. She had become my only link to that other world, a discreet and respectful source of information. We'd met for coffee a few times, and she had apologized profusely for her silence over the years. "I was a coward, Alex," she'd said, her eyes filled with genuine regret. "I saw what they were doing, and I didn't stop it. I had forgiven her. She was a victim of their system, too. I just thought you should know," she said on the phone, her voice gentle. "Karen and Thomas sold the house. The big one you grew up in." I was stunned into silence for a moment. "Why?" "They had to," she explained. "They'd taken out a second mortgage a few years ago to fund one of Nathan's brilliant business ideas that went bust. They were counting on not having to support him anymore once he was in your house. When that fell through, and with Nathan still not finding stable work, they couldn't afford it anymore. They've downsized to a small condo in a retirement community." I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel satisfaction. I just felt a quiet, sad sense of inevitability. The system they had created, the one that poured all resources into their favored son, was unsustainable. It had finally collapsed under its own weight. "And Nathan and Emma?" I asked, almost dreading the answer. "They're renting a tiny 2-bedroom apartment an hour outside the city," Susan said. "It's all they can afford. I hear things are tense between them. Emma is not happy. Reality has a way of hitting hard when the safety net is gone." That was the moment I truly understood. My victory wasn't in their failure. My victory was in my own success, built independently of their dysfunctional world. I had escaped the collapsing building, and they were now living in the rubble they had created. A year to the day after the meeting in Ms. Albright's office, I hosted a party. It was a housewarming for a home I'd lived in for years, but that finally felt like my own. It wasn't a big party, just a dozen people. Sarah was there, raising a glass to the indestructible bastard. Daniel was by my side, his hand resting comfortably on my back. Aunt Susan was there, smiling, finally free to be part of my life without hiding. A few other close friends, the people who had seen me through the worst of it, filled my home with laughter. Looking around at their faces, gathered around the fire pit I had built in the garden I had planted, I realized what I had done. I hadn't just won a house. I had built a family, a real one based on choice, respect, and genuine affection. This was my family. This was my home. And it was more beautiful and more solid than anything I had ever imagined. It's been another year since that party. The silence from my parents, my brother, and his wife remains unbroken. Sometimes, in a quiet moment, I wonder what they think, what stories they tell themselves now to make sense of it all. But then I realize it doesn't matter. Their narrative no longer has any power over me. Their story has ended. Mine is still being written. My life is full. My work is challenging and rewarding. My relationship with Daniel is the healthiest, most supportive partnership I've ever known. My friendships are my bedrock. My home is my sanctuary, a place of peace and creativity, filled with the warmth of people who choose to be there and who I choose to have there. I did see my niece Lily once. Aunt Susan arranged it. We met at a public park, a neutral ground. She's a beautiful little girl with my brother's eyes, but I hope with none of the baggage that came with them. I felt a pang of something, not regret, but a faint sorrow for the family that could have been. I will be an uncle to her. I will be the cool, kind, and distant figure who sends thoughtful birthday gifts and Christmas cards. I will ensure she knows she is loved, but I will do it from a safe distance, a boundary that I will never again allow to be crossed. My responsibility is to her innocence, not to her parents' mistakes. The other day I was in my home office, the one that used to be a spare bedroom. I was looking out the window at the garden Daniel and I had planted. The flowers were in full bloom, a riot of color against the green. It struck me then that the whole ordeal, as painful as it was, had given me the greatest gift of all, myself. I had to be pushed to the absolute brink to finally stand up and claim my own value. I had to face losing everything to realize what was truly worth fighting for. The house was never just about the wood and the nails. It was about the right to my own life, the right to the fruits of my own labor, the right to say no. It was about building a foundation, not of brick and mortar, but of self-respect. The victory wasn't the moment they signed the papers in the lawyer's office. The victory is this quiet afternoon, this peaceful home, this life that I built, that I defended, and that I am now free to live, completely and utterly on my own terms. They didn't understand that I wasn't just fighting for a house. I was fighting for my soul. And I won. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it touched you in some way. Have you ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours, especially against people who were supposed to be on your side? Share your story in the comments below. I read them all. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.